The smell of pecan pie used to mean everything was right in the world. My late wife, Carol, made it every Thanksgiving without fail, 2 pies. Always 2, because she said one was never enough for a house full of people who loved each other. She'd start the night before, filling the kitchen with the warm, buttery smell of brown sugar and toasted nuts, humming something low and tuneless while she worked. I would sit at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and watch her, thinking I was the luckiest man alive. That kitchen, that smell, that woman, it was the whole of everything I needed. Carol passed 6 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end, which the doctors said was mercifully fast, though nothing about watching your wife disappear in front of you feels merciful. After the funeral, after the neighbors stopped bringing casseroles and the sympathy cards stopped arriving, I was left alone in a house that still smelled faintly like her, in a life that had been built entirely around another person and now needed to be rebuilt from scratch. My son, Ethan, was 31 then. He lived 40 minutes away in Plano with his wife, Serena, who he had married 2 years before Carol got sick. I want to be fair when I talk about Serena, because I know I am not a neutral party. But the truth is that even before everything that happened, she and I had never found our footing with each other. She was pleasant enough at holiday dinners, careful and polished in the way that people are when they are performing warmth rather than feeling it. She called me Gerald, in a tone that somehow always managed to sound like a mild correction. And she had a way of talking about her own family, her parents, her childhood home in River Oaks, her father's business that made everything else in the conversation feel slightly provincial by comparison. Ethan adored her. That much was clear, and I never faulted him for it. He was my son, and she made him happy, and for a long time I told myself that was enough. After Carol died, Ethan called every Sunday. He came by for dinner when he could. In the first year of my grief, he was genuinely good to me, and I held on to that. We had always been close in the uncomplicated way that fathers and sons can be, when neither of them needs much from the other, easy, comfortable, based on years of watching football together and not talking about anything important. I was good at that kind of love. I understood it. I did not always understand the other kinds. When Ethan called me in the spring of the following year to tell me that he and Serena had found a house they wanted to buy, I was happy for them. When he mentioned, carefully, that they were slightly short for the down payment, I didn't hesitate. I wrote a check for $42,000 and told him it was a gift, not a loan, because I didn't want money sitting between us like a ledger. Carol would have done the same. The house was beautiful, a 4-bedroom in a good school district, the kind of place you buy when you're thinking about the future. Their son, my grandson Owen, was born the following January. He came into the world on a Tuesday morning, and I drove to the hospital so fast I got a speeding ticket on the tollway, which I kept in my wallet for years afterward because it made me laugh. Owen was the best thing that had happened to me since losing Carol. He had her eyes that particular shade of gray that turned green in certain light, and from the time he was old enough to walk, he would reach for my hand when we crossed a parking lot, which is the kind of thing that makes a grown man understand why people believe in something larger than themselves. I was at their house every weekend that first year. I changed diapers. I sat up through fevers. I drove to the pharmacy at midnight for children's Tylenol without being asked. Serena, to her credit, never objected to my presence in those early months when the exhaustion of a newborn made extra hands genuinely necessary. But as Owen got older and the crisis of infancy passed, I began to notice a gradual shift in temperature. Sunday dinners became less frequent. My calls to Ethan were sometimes answered and sometimes not. When I visited, Serena was always polite, always composed, but there was a quality to her politeness that made me feel like a guest who had overstayed his welcome without ever being told the checkout time. I told myself I was imagining it. Grief does strange things to a person's sense of how they are perceived. I had spent enough time alone in the years after Carol died to have developed a slight paranoia about being a burden, and I knew that about myself, and I tried to account for it. I kept being useful in the ways I knew how to be. When Ethan mentioned that they were stretched thin, the mortgage, the daycare, Serena's car payment, The general, expensive machinery of modern life, I started transferring money into their account on the first of every month. Not an enormous amount. $1,500. Enough to take the edge off, he said, and the gratitude in his voice when he said it made me feel the way that helping your child is supposed to make you feel. Like it means something. Like you matter. When Owen turned 4, and they started looking at private kindergarten programs, Serena had opinions about a particular school in North Dallas with a Reggio Emilia approach and a waiting list that parents camped out for. The tuition was $31,000 a year. I told Ethan I would cover it. He tried to protest, and I told him Carol would have wanted Owen to have every advantage, which was true, and which settled. By the time Owen was 5 and enrolled in his second year at the school, I had been contributing to their household between the monthly transfers, the tuition, the occasional emergency, like the HVAC system that died in August for nearly 4 years. I did not track it carefully. I did not want to. Money that you track starts to feel transactional, and I did not want my relationship with my son to be transactional. I wanted it to mean something beyond what either of us could put on a spreadsheet. It was my accountant, Raymond, who finally sat me down. He pulled up the numbers without editorializing and laid them in front of me across a conference table in his office in Richardson. I looked at the total for a long time without speaking. Over 4 years, between the down payment, the monthly contributions, and the tuition payments, I had given or was actively paying out close to $320,000. Raymond watched my face and said nothing, which was the professional thing to do. I drove home slowly and sat in Carol's chair by the living room window, the one she used to read in, and I tried to figure out how I felt about the number. The honest answer is that the number itself didn't disturb me as much as the question it raised, which was this: at what point was I helping my son build a life? And at what point was I simply paying for a life that he and his wife had decided to have, regardless of whether they could actually afford it? I had seen Serena's wardrobe. I had seen the vacations. I had seen the way she talked about her parents' home in Houston, the housekeeper, the gardener, the annual trip to Italy with her mother and her aunts. Serena had grown up in a world where money was ambient, something that existed in the background without requiring discussion, and I think she had simply imported that world into her marriage without fully examining who was underwriting it. Her father, a man named Douglas, who wore a Patek Philippe watch and had the careful, assessing eyes of someone who had made a great deal of money by paying close attention to other people's weaknesses, had never once offered to contribute to his daughter's household expenses. I know because Ethan told me once, almost in passing, that he had brought it up with Serena early in their marriage, and she had told him it wasn't something her family did. What her family did, apparently, was provide the appearance of financial substance without the substance itself. I sat with all of this for several weeks and did nothing, because doing nothing had always been my preferred approach to complicated feelings. Carol used to say I could outweight a glacier, and she wasn't wrong. And sometimes that patience was wisdom, and sometimes it was just avoidance wearing patience's clothes. Then came the Thursday evening in early October, when Ethan called. He started with small talk, which he rarely did with me, and I noticed it but said nothing. He asked about my golf game, about a neighbor of mine whose name he had never remembered before, about whether I had seen a particular movie that had come out recently. I answered the questions and waited. "Dad," he finally said, "I need to talk to you about Thanksgiving." "Okay," I said. "Serena's parents are coming in from Houston this year. Her whole family. Actually, her brother and his wife. Her aunt from New Orleans. The cousins." He paused. "It's going to be a full house." "That sounds nice," I said. "I can bring the sweet potato casserole. Carol's recipe. Owen loves it." There was a silence that lasted long enough to have its own weight. "Dad." His voice had changed. Lower, careful. The voice of someone delivering information they have rehearsed. "Serena feels like, with her whole family there, it would be better if this year was just her family, her side." I sat down on the arm of Carol's chair without meaning to. "Her family," I said. "Yeah, it's just this year. It doesn't mean anything permanent. She just wants to have her parents there without it being complicated." I asked him what complicated meant, and he couldn't quite answer that. And we went back and forth for a few minutes in the polite, circling way that people do when one of them is trying to say something that the other one does not want to hear. Eventually, the shape of it became clear enough. Serena did not want me at Thanksgiving. Serena's parents would be there, and they were a certain kind of people, and I was a different kind of people, and apparently these two kinds of people were not compatible enough to share a table for one afternoon in November. I did not raise my voice. I want to say that clearly because it matters to me. I did not say anything cruel or accusatory. I said that I understood, which was not true, and that I hoped they had a wonderful Thanksgiving, which was somewhat true, and I said goodbye to my son, and I sat in the quiet of my house for a very long time. The pecan tree in my backyard was dropping its leaves. I could see it through the window. Carol had planted it the year we moved in, nearly 30 years ago, when it was a sapling she bought at a nursery outside of Waco. And now it was enormous, its branches reaching all the way to the fence line. She never lived to harvest pecans from it. It didn't produce its first real crop until the year after she died, which felt, at the time, like the universe had a mean sense of humor. I thought about calling Ethan back. I composed several versions of the conversation in my head and discarded all of them. I thought about calling my sister in Amarillo, who had strong opinions about family and was never reluctant to share them. I thought about a lot of things. What I did not think about in those first hours was money. That came later. I went to bed at my normal time and I slept badly, and I got up the next morning and made coffee and stood in my kitchen thinking about the fact that I was not welcome at my son's Thanksgiving table. The more I sat with it, the more the absurdity of it sharpened into something harder. Serena's family was coming. Douglas, with his Patek Philippe watch, who had never contributed $1 to the household that I was quietly subsidizing. Her mother, Margaret, who had visited once and spent the entire time talking about a kitchen renovation. The brother and his wife, and the cousins, and the aunt from New Orleans. All of them welcome at a table in a house that I had helped purchase, at a gathering that would be funded in no small part by money that moved from my bank account to my son's on the first of every month. I called Raymond that afternoon and asked him to pull the full accounting again. I wanted to see all of it in one place, clearly organized. He sent it over by email and I printed it out and sat at my kitchen table and read through it the way you read something you are going to have to make a decision about. The monthly transfers, the tuition payments, now in their second year, the down payment, the new water heater last spring, the plane tickets to San Diego for their anniversary that I had offered because I wanted them to have a weekend alone, which in retrospect felt like a different kind of gesture than it had at the time. I thought about Owen, whose gray-green eyes and small hand in parking lots had become the organizing fact of my emotional life since Carol died. I thought about the school he was in, the one with the waiting list and the Reggio Emilia approach, with the teachers who knew his name and the courtyard where the kids learned to garden. I thought about the conversation I'd had with Ethan 6 months earlier, when I'd told him I would cover Owen's tuition through the end of elementary school. Ethan had said, with genuine feeling, "Dad, I don't know what we'd do without you." I had been moved by that. I had let myself be moved by it. I did not make any calls that day. I did not send any emails. I sat with the accounting and I thought about what Carol would have done, which I knew was not necessarily a reliable guide because Carol was a more patient person than I am and a more forgiving one, but she was also not a person who allowed herself to be taken for granted, and she had a sharp and unsentimental understanding of the difference between generosity and being used. I thought she would have done what I did. The following Monday, I called the school's billing office and told them I would no longer be making payments on Owen's account. I was calm about it. The woman I spoke with was professional and non-judgmental, the way people in billing offices learn to be. She noted the change in the account, told me the next payment would be due in 30 days, and that was the end of the call. Then I called my bank and suspended the automatic transfer that went to Ethan's account on the first of the month. I did not call Ethan. I did not send a message. I went about my week golf on Tuesday, dinner with my sister who happened to be passing through, a library book I'd been meaning to finish for 3 weeks. I slept better than I had in a while, which surprised me slightly and then didn't. Thanksgiving came and went. I drove to Amarillo and had dinner with my sister's family, which was loud and chaotic in the way that large families always are, and I ate too much and watched football and played cards with my nephews until midnight, and it was, honestly, a better Thanksgiving than I had expected. My phone showed 2 texts from Ethan that day. "Happy Thanksgiving, Dad." And then, 2 hours later, "Hope you're doing okay." I replied to both with something brief and genuine, and did not elaborate. The school contacted Ethan on the 1st of December, when the payment for the upcoming semester did not arrive as expected. He called me that evening, and his voice had the quality of someone who has just been surprised and is trying not to show it. "Dad, I got a notice from Owen's school. They're saying the payment didn't go through." "That's correct," I said. "I canceled the payment." A pause. "What? Why?" "I've been thinking about my finances," I said. "I've decided to make some adjustments." "What does that mean?" "Owen's enrolled. He has a spot in the spring semester. They're going to give it away if we don't pay." "I understand that," I said. "You and Serena will need to make arrangements." Another pause. Longer this time. I could hear him working through it on the other end. The calculations happening in real time. "Dad, we can't cover that on short notice. You know what that tuition is. We don't have that just sitting." "I know," I said. "I know what the tuition is." "So, why are you doing this?" I thought about how to answer that. I was not angry, exactly. The anger, if it had ever been primarily anger, had metabolized into something cooler and more deliberate in the weeks since October. What I felt, sitting in my kitchen with the phone at my ear, was more like clarity. "Ethan," I said, "you told me in October that I wasn't welcome at Thanksgiving at my own grandson's house. A house I helped you buy. A celebration that I have attended every year of Owen's life." The silence, on the other end, was total. "I've been thinking about that," I said. "And I've also been thinking about the fact that I have been contributing to your household for 4 years. I don't say that as an accusation. I did it willingly. But I want you to understand what it actually means, what the numbers actually look like, because I think you may not have looked at them carefully." "Dad, I'm not angry," I said, and I meant it. "But I am no longer going to arrange my finances around a family that doesn't include me." He started to say something about Serena, and about how it was a one-time thing, and about how her family visits were always complicated and stressful, and he should have handled it differently. I listened to all of it. I did not dismiss it, because I believe that most of it was probably true, and I believe my son is a decent man who found himself caught between 2 loyalties and made the wrong call. That is a very human thing to do. I understand it. But understanding something and accepting the consequences of it are 2 different things, and Ethan had spent enough of his adult life having me smooth the consequences flat that I think he had stopped fully believing they existed. "I'm not asking you to choose between me and Serena," I said, when he had finished. "I'm asking you to make sure your own family is actually taken care of by the people responsible for taking care of it." "Her parents could help," he said, and there was a note in his voice when he said it that I had never heard before, something frustrated and honest and a little raw. "I know they could. Her dad's not. He could write that check without thinking about it. Serena just won't ask him." "That's something you and Serena need to work out," I said. We talked for another 20 minutes, going back and forth in the careful, circling way of people who love each other and are also in conflict with each other. By the end, we had not resolved anything, but the air between us felt different, cleaner, maybe, in the way that air does after a storm. He called back 2 days later. He had spoken to Serena. He had also, apparently, had a separate conversation with his father-in-law that he described as long overdue, and which I did not press him for details about because it wasn't my conversation to have an opinion on. "She wants to apologize to you," he said. "Serena? In person? I'd be glad to hear it," I said. The apology happened over dinner at a restaurant in Frisco on a Saturday evening, 3 weeks before Christmas. Serena came in wearing the careful, composed expression she usually wore with me. But about midway through the appetizers, something in it shifted. She was not a woman who apologized easily. I had known that about her for years, and watching her do it was uncomfortable for all 3 of us in the way that genuine things often are. She said she had been thoughtless. She said she had not considered what it meant to exclude me. She said, and this was the part that surprised me, that she knew I had been carrying their household for years, and that she had allowed herself not to look at it directly because looking at it directly was something she didn't know how to sit with comfortably. I told her I appreciated it, and I did. I am not a person who needs elaborate contrition. I need to know that the person in front of me sees the situation clearly. And she did. We had a long dinner. Ethan ordered a bottle of wine he didn't usually order, which I took as a sign that he was relieved. Serena told a story about her father, about the conversation they'd had, that made me understand her better than 4 years of polite holiday dinners had. Douglas, who wore his wealth like armor, had responded to Ethan's conversation by writing a check for Owen's spring semester tuition, almost before Ethan had finished explaining the situation. He had said nothing emotional about it. He had simply written the check. That was, apparently, the only language he knew for taking responsibility, and it was also, I realized, where Serena had learned to receive love primarily as resource rather than as presence, and why she had never quite understood what I was actually offering. All those years? That is not an excuse. But it is an explanation, and explanations have their own kind of value. I reinstated the monthly transfer in January at a reduced amount. It was not a concession, and I did not present it as one. I had simply recalibrated what was appropriate given what I had learned about where I stood. And Ethan and Serena, to their credit, did not push back or express any expectation of more. Ethan started calling me twice a week instead of once. The calls were longer. We talked about things we had not talked about before. Owen came over the Saturday before Christmas, and we made pecan pie together, one pie, just the two of us, using a recipe I had found in Carol's handwriting on an index card in the back of a kitchen drawer. Owen stood on a step stool at the counter and measured the brown sugar with a seriousness that made me think of his grandmother, who had always taken the work of a kitchen very seriously. He got corn syrup on his elbow and did not notice. He asked me what Grandma Carol was like, and I told him about the way she hummed when she baked, and the fact that she made 2 pies because she said one was never enough for a house full of people who loved each other, and he thought about that for a moment and said, "We should make 2. So we made 2. When I took the pies out of the oven and set them on the cooling rack, and the kitchen filled with that smell, warm, brown sugared, unmistakably the smell of every good thing I had ever known, I stood there for a moment and didn't say anything. Owen had climbed down from his step stool and was watching me with his gray-green eyes and the slightly serious expression he wore when he was paying close attention to something. "Are you sad, Grandpa?" he asked. "No," I said, and I meant it. I'm really not. The thing about being in your 60s is that you have had enough time to understand the difference between what matters and what doesn't, and the trouble is that understanding it doesn't make you immune to losing track of it. I had spent 4 years letting my need to be needed override my need to be respected, and I had dressed it up as generosity, which is easy to do when the story you're telling is about love. But love without self-respect is not love, it's loneliness, trying to rent itself out as something more dignified. Carol knew that. She would have told me sooner than I told myself. I know that now. I am telling it to you the way I am telling it to you, because I think some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. That particular mathematics of family, where you keep adding to one side of the equation and wondering why the balance never feels right. The answer is usually that you've been calculating the wrong thing. Ethan drove up on Christmas Eve with Serena and Owen, and they brought food, and I had the tree lit and the house warm, and a bottle of Carol's favorite bourbon on the counter. Serena brought flowers, which she had never done before, and arranged them in a vase without being asked, moving around my kitchen with a naturalness she had never had in it. Her parents came on Christmas Day, Douglas with his watch, Margaret with a bottle of good wine and an unexpected warmth that I think Ethan's conversation had in some way unlocked, and we sat around my table, all of us, eating food that multiple people had made, and talking about things that mattered to all of us. Douglas, at some point in the evening, looked at the pecan tree through the living room window and asked how old it was. I told him my wife had planted it 30 years ago. He nodded slowly and said, "That's a serious tree," which I think, for Douglas, was a genuine form of admiration. "She was a serious woman," I said. He raised his glass. We all did. Owen fell asleep on the couch at 9 o'clock with his head on my knee, and I stayed where I was for a long time after he fell asleep, one hand on his back, Watching the lights on the tree, Carol had always insisted needed real bulbs and not LED. Feeling the particular quiet of a house that is full of people you love. I thought about what I had almost let happen, how close I had come to continuing down a road that looked like generosity, but led somewhere much lonelier. I thought about my accountant Raymond, who had never said a single judgmental word about any of it, but had put the numbers in front of me with the quiet confidence of a man who trusts facts to speak for themselves. I thought about the phone call in October, and the silence after it, and the pecan tree dropping its leaves in the backyard, while I sat in Carol's chair and figured out what I actually believed. I did not come to any grand conclusions that Christmas. I am not a man who thinks in grand conclusions. What I came to was something smaller and more durable than that. Just the understanding that the people who love you should make room for you at the table. And if they don't, then the most honest thing you can do is stop quietly setting it for them. Carol would have called that common sense. She would have said it over her shoulder while she was rolling out pie crust, in the same tone she used for truths so obvious they barely needed saying. She was right. She was usually right. The pie was good, by the way. Both of them. Owen declared them the best he had ever tasted, with the authority of a 6-year-old who has never tasted anything he didn't have an opinion about. And I told him that was because he helped make them, and he considered that and said, "Yeah, that's probably why." It probably was.